Welcome back to another Patreon episode, and in this episode I want to show how you can create a random tiled based dungeon crawler without actually much easier. So the way to do this is we've got a brand new construct here, and we're actually going to go straight to layouts and create a brand new layout. Now this is just going to be a layout only, and the name needs to be very specific. It's going to be object repository, and as far as I'm aware, the way this works is any objects created in this repository will always be loaded at the start. So you can set all your properties out the way. Normally what I do is just place the objects in the top of the screen and then change the properties of them, but then they're on the screen. So this is just a separate layout, a way that we can create objects in. And with this and another technique, we can actually do something very clever. So first I'm actually going to do is take the size of my layout and just apply it to the viewport. This is just more so we can visualize the dungeon much easier without having to walk around it. We can see the whole dungeon in one go. And we're going to start by creating our first tile. So we're going to scroll down until we see the word sprite, and this is going to be tile 1. Click anywhere and then give it a color of some sort. In my case, I'm going to go, let's go for a brown actually, to make it look more like a sort of dungeon floor. Obviously you can add a text to this as well, but for sake of the video, I'll keep it really simple. And just place your tile somewhere. We're then going to repeat this for however many tiles you want. So in my case, I'm going to keep it really simple and just go for 4 different tiles. But again, you can make this quite large. And for each tile, we're just going to drag it into the screen. So there's my second tile, there's my third tile, and my fourth tile. And it is really important that each of these have their own unique names. This does mean that if you've got quite a large set of tiles that you want for your game, and we're talking about unique tiles, then this can be quite large in terms of your files, but at the same time it does make it much easier to create something like this than what we could have done before. So now we've got our 4 tiles in place, we now need to add some objects to each individual tile. So I'm going to create 3 really simple objects. So here's my 3 objects that I want to place on my tiles. We've got a wall represented by a black line, we've got a coin, and we've got an enemy. So what we can do now is actually start placing these where we want them in our tiles. So for instance, if I just do tile 1, I want 2 walls either side. I want a coin in the corner, and I might make that a little bit smaller because it's quite large. And then I'm going to have an enemy guard in it, and let's put another coin in as well. So this is a tile that could randomly spawn inside of my dungeon. What I need to do now is actually put the objects on my other 3 tiles. So there's my 4 tiles, and again you'd probably want a lot more than just 4 different tiles, but what we want to do eventually is randomly place these in a grid pattern, so again it creates a random dungeon every time you play. So now we've got that set up, we actually need to do one more thing on this screen, and that's actually link these objects to the tile behind it. And the way we do this is just drag it over all the objects, making sure our tile's the one at the back, right click, go to hierarchy, and add selection to this instance. If done correctly, if we were to click off and then move our tile, everything should be linked to our tile and should have arrows pointing to the objects. So just repeat that for the others. So again, just highlight, right click, hierarchy, add selection to instance. And every time we do this, what we're essentially saying is when we create this object, also create the other objects attached to it. And that's really powerful. We can do a lot with just that little bit of code there. So let's move to our event sheet. And the first thing we need to do in our event sheet is actually make note of the size of our tiles. So my tiles are 250 by 250. Obviously, if you've changed the size of yours, then just make note of that. So I'm going to add a global variable, tile size, and the initial value will be 250. Next, going to add an event. This is going to be system. Scroll down, and we want on start of layout. Now we're not actually going to add an action to this, we're just going to add a sub event instead. So click on the green arrow at the end and add a sub event. And the first thing we want to do is repeat for all the rows. And to do that, we just add a repeat. The count is going to take the layout width, and we're just going to divide it by our tile size. Now before we continue, we're just going to click at the end here, right click and add a local variable. I'm just going to call this x, and this is going to keep track of the loop index of this particular loop. So we're just going to do system set value of x to loop index, and then we're just going to copy and paste this code again, drag it inside, so you should see it pop in like so it's underneath, and the way to test that is just can you hide it, and we do this for every column. And you might have guessed that we're just going to change layout width for layout height, and we no longer need this set x, so that can disappear. So now we can add our action, which is the creation of our tiles. So we're going to do system create object by name. Now this is the first clever bit. We're going to do tile, but we want a random tile out of those four. So we're going to write and then we're going to use the function called choose. Now choose just basically says choose between one of these values. So for instance, if I do 1, 2, 3, 4, it's going to choose a random number between 1, 2, 3, and 4. What you can also do with this, if you want a tile to be more common, is you can just add more instances of it. So now 4 is a lot more likely to come up than the other tiles. I'm just going to get rid of that though and just keep it as an equal chance, but that's something you can play around with the probability. Layer is going to be 0, and then for x, we're going to set the x value, which is the x loop index, and times the tile size. Now, if we were to leave this as this, our first tile will start where only half of it is on the screen. And that's because the origin point is in the center, and we're placing this at 0, 0 essentially. So what we want to do is just shift it by half a tile size. So to do this, we just add tile size divided by 2. And then we're just going to copy and paste this. Do the same for the y, but we haven't got a y value. We don't need one because we're just going to use the current loop index. This will be the loop index of the second value. Again, we can't get the loop index of the first value because we've already overrid it. Because we've already overrid the term loop index with now our second loop. So that's why we had to save that one as x. And then the final bit, which is the most important bit of any of this code, is this tick box. If you don't tick this tick box, when it creates the object, it doesn't create the other stuff attached to it. By ticking this, it should now do that. And if we run and test it, we now have our random dungeon created. Is it pretty? No, not really. But when you play around and get a bit more feel with the tiles, then you'll feel a bit more confident with it. And one thing to note with this as well is we have obviously got the problem of we cannot access every single tile. This is just one of the drawbacks, unfortunately, when messing about with random dungeon generation, is can you get from one tile to the next? And that's not always the case. So this can make it quite difficult to make a solvable dungeon. So make sure you've got lots of tiles that have lots of open pathways and not too many with any closed dead ends. Finally, we just need to add our player to this world. So I'm just going to go back to the object repository, insert a new object, and I'm going to create my player. And again, just resize my player to the size I want my player to be. Before I forget, I'm just going to add the solid behavior to my wall, because that's going to be needed for our next bit, because we don't want our player to spawn in a wall. So we need to obviously do a check for that. So we're just going to do on start of layout, system, create objects is going to be our player. And then for the X, we're going to do random, any value from 0 to our layout width. And then for our Y, random, 0 to our layout height. And then we're just going to add an event that just says player is overlapping another object, being a wall. And then what we're going to do is actually take our player and destroy it, if that's the case. And then just copy and paste this code to create a new player. And again, the only way it should happen is just at the start of the layout. So once that's done, we should be in a random spot. And you see my player's up here, outside of a wall. So that's going to be it for this particular Patreon episode. However, as this is quite a short concept, I'm actually going to do 2 concepts this month instead, and then hopefully have the cluster truck video available for you next month as sort of a 3D tutorial instead. But thank you all for the support, and I'll see you in the next video.